Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, March 22nd. Tonight, we begin with a deal that would ensure the Liberal minority government the support of the New Democrats. It's not a coalition, but the parties have agreed on a supply and confidence agreement that will see the NDP support the Prime Minister in confidence votes until 2025. Mr. Trudeau says the deal takes effect immediately and is about focusing on what each party agrees on. It will include action on dental care, climate change, housing, and paid sick leave. Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen is calling it a Liberal NDP government and says the deal will lead to the decimation of Canadian oil and gas. Well, some positive developments in the ongoing CP Rail dispute. The union, representing 3,000 CP Rail conductors, engineers, and train and yard workers, has agreed to enter into final and binding arbitration and end a work stoppage that started on Sunday. Workers returned to the job at noon local time, and CP says it will immediately begin working with customers to resume normal train operations as soon as possible. Industry groups had urged Ottawa to introduce back-to-work legislation because so many businesses are already dealing with supply chain difficulties. Turning to Canada's role in the world's fight against the pandemic. Canada is urging the World Health Organization not to reject the only Canadian-made COVID-19 vaccine. This so it can be donated and used by the COVAX Vaccine Sharing Alliance. But Canada hasn't even donated half of the vaccine doses it already promised to make available from its own supplies. International Development Minister Harjit Sajjan says it's not the availability of doses getting in the way. Instead, it's education campaigns to overcome vaccine hesitancy. And efforts to get vaccines to remote areas or conflict zones have been far more complicated than within Canada. Well, one of the largest energy companies in Canada is facing sanctions after some missteps during construction of an oil pipeline. Minnesota's Department of Natural Resources says the damage to public groundwater aquifers is more severe than first thought. Officials say Enbridge crews ruptured 3 groundwater aquifers along the Line 3 oil pipeline from Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin. The State Department of Natural Resources says the company faces expanded sanctions as a result. Enbridge says it takes protecting the environment seriously, regrets what happened, and is taking steps to improve its procedures to prevent this type of occurrence in the future. A new bill hopes to ban the confinement of wild animals at roadside zoos. The bill, supported by primatologist Jane Goodall, was introduced today by Senator Marty Klein. The Jane Goodall Act was first introduced in late 2020, but died last year when the federal election was called. Senator Klein says the bill would primarily ban new captivity of lions, apes, bears, and hundreds of other animals at roadside zoos. Several zoos have signed on in support of the bill. This includes the Toronto Zoo, the Calgary Zoo, the Granby Zoo, the Assiniboine Park Zoo, and the Montreal Biodome. In Saskatchewan, a Saskatoon-based drone maker is using its unique abilities to assist in efforts within Ukraine. Dragonfly has filled an order for about 200 specialized high-tech drones that are being used to deliver medical equipment and supplies into the country. The drones are 3 times the size of standard versions, and CEO Cameron Chell says it literally takes seconds for them to drop off the supplies and get out of there. Mr. Chell says the order came from the humanitarian organization Revived Soldiers Ukraine. These drones are being outfitted to carry bandages, tools, and medicines like insulin to save lives. Well, this comes as one of Shopify's co-founders and a retired Canadian Special Forces officer have launched a venture capital fund that they say will pour millions into security and intelligence companies. Daniel Waynand and Glenn Cowan say the aim of their special mission fund is to bridge the gap between private capital markets and innovators in the security space. Mr. Cowan says the fund has a $10 million anchor commitment from Kensington Capital Partners and a fundraising target of $50 million. Well, it looks like soccer fans will have to wait to know all the teams playing at FIFA. The governing body of soccer says only 29 of the 32 teams will be known by next week's World Cup draw. This is because of Russia's war with Ukraine and the pandemic. The 3 remaining places will be decided in June. The Canadian men's soccer team is on the verge of making the World Cup as it gears up for its final 3 qualifying games starting on Thursday in Costa Rica. A win would seal the deal, but a draw combined with other results on Thursday could also get them to Qatar 2022. The Canadian men have only ever qualified for the World Cup once in 1986 in Mexico. All right, up next, an on-the-ground look at medical aid within Ukraine. An interview with Dr. Anthony Fong, clinical lead with the Canadian medical assistance teams operating within Ukraine. The World Health Organization says it has confirmed 62 attacks on healthcare assets in Ukraine since the conflict began and through last Friday. The assets include hospitals and medical facilities, transport of medical supplies, warehouses, and healthcare workers. Meanwhile, international medical aid groups have come to the war-ravaged country to assist those fleeing for safety or those who are hurt from Russian attacks. Joining us now to give us a perspective of the healthcare system and medical aid on the ground in Ukraine is Dr. Anthony Fong, clinical lead and emergency physician at Canadian Medical Assistance Teams, or CMAT. He joins us from a medical checkpoint in Ukraine near the Polish border. Dr. Fong, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much, Nima. Glad to be with you.
Sir, tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing on the ground and what kind of challenges you and your team are facing amid this war.
So CMAT has been providing mostly primary care, and that means mostly what you would imagine a family doctor would do, and providing a lot of urgent care, and kind of what you would want to see, what you would normally see in a walk-in clinic. We've been seeing lots of people with chronic disease like hypertension, diabetes, high blood pressure, lots of cough and cold, headaches, and anxiety.
All right, doctor. Well, what is the current state of these medical checkpoints? Do you have enough supplies to assist all of those who are coming through?
Currently, we're doing really well with supplies. We've been lucky enough to have very generous donations of medications and medical equipment, and we've been able to put them to good use. And when we run out of something, we've been able to very effectively source out replacement equipment. What we do always highly value and can always need more of is, during these disaster deployments, I think we always highly value people who understand the culture and speak the local language. And in this case, we're working with in Poland with Polish-speaking peoples, as well as in Ukraine with Ukrainian-speaking peoples.
All right, doctor. Well, we mentioned there have been over 60 attacks on healthcare assets in Ukraine. So what is the current state of Ukraine's overall healthcare system?
Well, Nima, I can't comment directly as to Ukraine's healthcare system, as we don't work within it. But what I can say is that out east, where there is active conflict and violence and shelling, there are definite needs for medical supplies. And close to the Polish-Ukrainian border, there are few resources from the Ukrainian side in order to staff those regions. So that's where CMAT comes in, and other NGOs that are assisting in providing care to refugees who, show up to the border after sometimes traveling for hundreds or even 1,000 kilometers, and are hungry and have medical conditions that need treatment.
So how are you and your team handling this stressful situation right now?
I think ours is a very diverse team consisting of nurses, doctors. We have 2 emergency physicians, other than me, another emergency physician on the team. We have 2 pediatric ER nurses. We have other nurses on the team as well, nurse practitioner, as well as a team psychologist. So we have a very diverse team that's capable of providing the full scope of emergency medical services in this challenging place, quite independently. And also we came with our own equipment, so that helps a lot. As for dealing with the stress, so Nima, the air alarms do go on every night here. So certainly safety is always on our mind. However, we do have very firm, robust safety contingency plans our team has been able to secure insurance for ourselves as well across the border. And really along the border, we are just meters away from the Polish border. So we've actually felt very secure here.
All right, Doctor, it sounds like you've got a very brave and a very passionate team, sir. So just a quick 30 seconds left here, but how can our Canadian viewers help you and your team's efforts?
Sure, that's a great question. I think one of the things on the top of my team's mind, we had a discussion actually earlier as to this, is just to be careful about information that you see on social media. And if you decide to share something, be very careful that it's correct information, comes from a reputable source, and be careful not to spread misinformation. As well as if you decide to donate to various charities or organizations, I highly recommend just checking out as to how they're spending those funds.
Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has hinted at more military spending. This is following moves from NATO allies to boost defense budgets to equal 2% of their domestic economies amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This conflict has changed the world since early February. This was when the government surveyed private sector economists about their outlooks to help underpin budget calculations. And with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, countries around the world are reevaluating their national defense budgets and priorities. With us now to discuss Canada's defense needs in the Arctic is Dr. Rob Hubert, maritime and Arctic security expert and a professor at the University of Calgary. Dr. Hubert, welcome back to Forum Daily.
It's my pleasure to be again with you.
Now, sir, historically, Canada has been criticized for its defense spending when it comes to NATO. So how does Canada compare to other NATO allies?
Well, at 1.4% or thereabouts, we're probably at the very bottom. I mean, there's a few countries like Iceland that spend less on us, but it's hard to find any of the substantial European countries and, of course, the Americans that are below us.
And considering that Canada shares the shores of the Arctic Ocean with Russia, how important is the Arctic region to Canada strategically, especially amid this war?
Well, it's one of the key elements. It's out of sight, out of mind, but people forget that it is the Arctic region that really offers the element of the protection against any form of, first of all, the Soviets and then the Russian nuclear strike. It's where deterrence is maintained. And to have deterrence work, you have to have the ability to know if your enemy is attacking you, in this case, the Russians. And that is an expensive proposition. And we haven't really done anything to update since about 1985 our capabilities.
And on top of that, we know Canada recently withdrew from the Arctic Council along with other members over this invasion. So what kind of impact would this have on Canadian security in the region?
Well, the Arctic Council was for cooperation. It dealt with environmental issues. It dealt with improving the situation and the voices for Indigenous northern peoples. And so it very specifically was not allowed to deal with security issues. This was one of the elements when it was being created. Now, what's going to happen, in my view, is that we can probably expect to see Finland trying to seek a membership in NATO, and probably Sweden will follow. I very much doubt that Russia will, even once the Ukrainian war is over, that even if we are willing to admit the Russians back into the Arctic Council, I doubt that the Russians will want to come. So we're going to see two different organizations being created. We'll see a Arctic Council, just like the G8 transform to the G7, and the Russians will probably create, and that will act to cement the divide between any cooperation.
We'll definitely have to keep our eyes out for that development, sir. But what do we know so far about Canada's current defense capacity in the Arctic?
Well, a lot of talk. We had a very well thought out Canadian defense policy that was issued back in 2017, Strong, Secure, and Engage, but we haven't done anything. The aircraft that we have is sort of our sword within the overall protection of the system, the F-18s. We got them back in 1978 to 1982. We've been talking about replacements, of course, haven't moved on it. As I said earlier, the North Warning System really cannot detect the new type of hypersonic missiles that the Russians are now deploying and have shown very capable of having in the ongoing Ukrainian war. And we have almost no maritime capability of being able to determine if, in fact, any of the new Russian submarines, or even worse, their underwater autonomous vehicles are coming. And so it's a pretty empty situation as far as the Canadian security is concerned.
Some very concerning information there, Doctor. Just about a minute left here, but what needs to be done to improve Canadian defense capacity in the Arctic?
Well, the first one is actually fund NORAD, like we said we were. We also have to look to have the capability of going to space-based assets, working with our American allies, and improving our underwater capabilities in terms of detecting the developing threats.
All right, Doctor, it seems like we've got about 30 seconds left here, but given the potential economic importance of Arctic resources, what would a good Canadian strategic policy for the Arctic look like over the next decade?
Well, right now, it only looks internally. Our Arctic policy is very much just on domestic issues. And so we're still kind of waiting for the Liberals to try to come up with something that can be said to be looking outwards. So we need to be aware of the threat. We also have to be aware of the environmental threat, which is equally dangerous to Canada. And quite frankly, we haven't seen any sign of being able to do either one properly, let alone trying to deal with both of them at the same time.
Lots of steps needing to be taken. Doctor, thank you again for your time today on Forum Daily.
Always my pleasure.
Up next, we'll be looking at today's top international headlines. Ukrainian troops reclaim an important suburb in Kyiv. Ukraine tries to block the Russian army from using Chinese civilian drones to target missile attacks. China claims it is fully within its rights to militarize islands in the South China Sea. And Yemen's Houthi rebels strike the same Saudi Arabian oil site they hit a year and a half ago. That and more coming up next. Ukraine's defense ministry says troops have forced Russian soldiers out of a suburb in Kyiv after a fierce battle. But Russia has partially taken control of other northwest suburbs, some of which had been under attack almost since the invasion began. President Vladimir Zelensky says he is prepared to discuss a commitment not to seek NATO membership in exchange for a ceasefire, the withdrawal of Russian troops, and a guarantee of Ukraine's security. He also repeated his call for direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, the UN says over 3.5 million people have left the country since the war began. Poland has taken in over 2.1 million. Meanwhile, Ukraine is appealing to a Chinese maker of civilian drones. This to block what the Ukrainian government says is their use by the Russian army to target missile attacks. The appeal to DJI Technology Corporation highlights the conflict in Ukraine for Chinese companies. Beijing says Moscow is its most important strategic partner at a time when Western companies have cut ties with Russia. A Ukrainian official said Russian forces are using DJI products in order to navigate their missile. He appealed to DJI to deactivate drones activated in Russia, Syria, or Lebanon. The company responded that it can't deactivate drones, but it can impose geofencing or software restrictions on where all drones in Ukraine can fly. China is also navigating a dispute within the U.S. The Asian country says it has the right to develop South China Sea islands as it sees fit and is accusing the U.S. of undermining security in the disputed waterway. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin's comments on Tuesday follow accusations from the U.S. Indo-Pacific commander. He says that China has fully militarized at least 3 of several islands that it built in the disputed waterway, violating previous commitments by President Xi Jinping not to do so. Mr. Wang described U.S. military actions in the area as provocations. Turning to the Middle East now, where Yemen's Houthi rebels this week struck the same oil storage tank in the Saudi Arabian city of Jeddah that it had previously hit a year and a half ago. That's according to satellite photos by Planet Labs PBC. The photos were analyzed by the Associated Press on Tuesday. They showed the damage on Sunday to the North Jeddah bulk plant, which sits just southeast of the city's international airport. The airport is crucial for Muslim pilgrims heading to Mecca. The exact same storage tank owned by the state oil behemoth Saudi Aramco was hit by what the Houthis described as a cruise missile in a November 2020 attack. In Japan, the government is alerting people in the Tokyo region that they may face blackouts as power runs short. The rare alert on Tuesday came as people were using more heat than usual due to snow and unusually cold weather for the early spring. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake on March 16th caused temporary outages, while coal-fired plants assessed and repaired the damage. Power has been restored since, but the grid is under severe strain, and officials have urged the public and businesses to help by conserving energy. The family of a Pulitzer Prize-winning Indian photographer who was killed in Afghanistan last year has filed a formal complaint with the International Criminal Court to investigate his killing. Lawyer Avi Singh, who is representing Danish Siddiqui's family, said Tuesday that the complaint seeks to bring to trial at least 6 high-ranking Taliban leaders and high-level commanders for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Mr. Siddiqui worked for the Reuters news service and was killed in July 2021 while embedded with Afghan special forces. The Taliban has denied Mr. Siddiqui was killed by the group. Well, some deadly weather within the United States, where a 73-year-old woman is dead and more than a dozen people were injured when tornadoes tore through parts of Texas and Oklahoma, damaging a school, homes, and businesses. And the same storm system is expected to sweep into Louisiana and Mississippi today. Tornado watches are in effect for parts of Texas and Louisiana. Governments and UNICEF have launched a drive to vaccinate more than 9 million children in 4 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa against polio. That's after an outbreak was confirmed in Malawi. The vaccination drive started there and will also visit Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zambia with the goal of ultimately vaccinating more than 20 million children over the next few months. A study in the Journal of the American Medical Association finds singing and listening to music are linked to improvements in mental well-being. Researchers reviewed 26 studies and found that music interventions were associated with statistically and clinically significant improvements in mental well-being and health-related quality of life. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.